Here's who Fran Brown has added on offense in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're going over everyone Syracuse football has added in the transfer portal on offense, and there are a lot of them to go over on today's show. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, so before we get to all the ads for Syracuse football on the offensive side of the ball in the transfer portal, just a quick update on Syracuse and their total scholarships. So right now, the Orange, they have 86 players on its roster under scholarship. The NCAA only allows 85. So right now the team is one over. So in the next couple of months or so, they're going to have to figure out how to trim one player off the roster, which could be for a variety of reasons, but they are currently one over right now. Having said that, let's get to the guys that Syracuse has added in the transfer portal on offense, specifically quarterbacks. And let's start with Kyle McCord, shall we? Kyle McCord, the four-star transfer quarterback from Ohio State. Last year, he had 3,200 yards. He had 24 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions. He was one of the first players to commit to Syracuse after Fran Brown was hired, and he was top 10 last year in the country in QBR. I love Kyle McCord. I love the addition because he really is different from, and I talked about this on previous podcasts, he really is different compared to other Syracuse quarterbacks in the past. He just throws with that zip on the ball that I like to talk about. It's just a different ball, so to speak. He just looks and feels different, and you can see the talent that he had out of high school, where he was a 5-star recruit, one of the top high school quarterbacks in the country in his class. And his greatest crime was that he was good, but he was not a first-round NFL caliber quarterback at Ohio State last season. They moved on from him. He moved on from them. He goes to Syracuse, and he easily projects to be the quarterback one for next season. Barring something absolutely mind-boggling, he will be the starting quarterback for the Orange. Of course, we don't wish injury upon anyone, but whatever. Anyways, let's move on to the next quarterback that Syracuse football has added. And there has been in the last few weeks, some rumors about the Orange looking for another quarterback in the transfer portal, someone who might be able to compete for the backup role. And it kind of appears that Syracuse has just done it, as recently the Orange added Michael Johnson Jr., the quarterback from FAU. He is listed as a quarterback. He is the son of Syracuse co-offensive coordinator and tight end coach Michael Johnson. And the reason why it's kind of weird with Michael Johnson Jr., the quarterback, is because on his Twitter post when he announced he was committing to Syracuse, it said, quote, offensive weapon. What is an offensive weapon? Think of maybe, is this another Dan Villari type player, someone who was a quarterback but is kind of a Swiss Army knife on the offensive side of the ball? Maybe Michael Johnson last year, he only threw one pass, but he did have 23 carries for 140 yards, which is over 6 yards per carry. Okay, I'll take an offensive weapon, so to speak. It seems like it can't necessarily be a bad addition. There's no really such thing as a bad addition, more just like how impactful they'll be. I don't know. I think that Dan Villari has offensive weapon pretty much locked up as the starter. Perhaps Michael Johnson can come in and maybe compete for the backup job with Carlos Del Rio Wilson and Braden Davis. It's one of those things where I've looked into Michael Johnson Jr. and I legitimately will tell you, I guess he's a weapon. That's what it is. So Syracuse has only added 2 quarterbacks in the transfer portal. The main one being Kyle McCord. He will be the quarterback 1 for next season, replacing Garrett Schrader, who was the starting quarterback for the last 2 years for this team. Really the last 3 years, because he took over from Tommy DeVito early in 2021. So Kyle McCord, he has the keys to the team next season. And then they bring in Michael Johnson, who they say, or he says, is an offensive weapon, someone who they can bring in that can mix it up, throw a different look for opposing defenses. Not much to talk about with the quarterbacks, but coming up, Syracuse football has added a trio of wide receivers in the transfer portal. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and Gametime is what you should use to buy tickets. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Some of you guys might be New York Knicks fans, and they're up 2-0 right now in the series, and you can use Gametime tickets to buy tickets to attend a home or road playoff game against the Indiana Pacers. Just go on the Gametime app and search up Knicks tickets. My favorite part is I get to see the view from my seat before I buy and get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we're going over every single player so far that Syracuse football has added in the transfer portal on offense. And in segment number 1, we talked about the 2 quarterbacks. Kyle McCord easily projects to be the quarterback 1 for next season, and then they just added Michael Johnson from FAU, who is an offensive weapon, meaning he can play multiple positions on the offensive side of the ball. We talked a little bit about him. And now it's time to get to the skill players and specifically the trio of wide receivers and where they project for Syracuse football next season. The Orange did not add any running backs or any tight ends in the transfer portal, unless, of course, you want to count Michael Johnson as that offensive weapon. Having said that, the trio of receivers, let's start with Zeed Haynes, who redshirted at Georgia last season. He was a 4-star recruit for them, and he was a 3-star transfer, high-end 3-star transfer, if I might add. And this is someone who I project next year to be the wide receiver 1 on this team. Wide receiver 1, not the go-to number 1 guy, but the wide receiver 1. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think Arondé Gadsden is the number 1 pass-catching target for this team. But if you're looking at specifically receivers, Zeed Haynes, I think, is going to be the number 1 guy for Syracuse next season. And in the spring game, the Syracuse spring game, we can call it, obviously, he really did flash his speed. He had that long touchdown grab on the right sideline. It was a perfect throw from Kyle McCord, and they tried it multiple times throughout the first bit of that game, and it finally worked. and you can just see the speed. He seems like he's got good hands. So Zeed Haynes, field stretcher, someone who can take the top off the defense. I really like how he projects for Syracuse next season. Very easily could be the wide receiver one for the Orange. Now let's get to Jackson Meeks. He is a 3-star transfer also from Georgia. He's got 1 year of eligibility left, and he's only got 10 career catches with Georgia, and he missed the spring game with a foot injury. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 2 next season. And I know he only had 10 catches at Georgia and he was a 3-star transfer, but at the same time, it's Georgia and they have a ton of talent over there. So just because he was someone that couldn't really carve out the biggest role in the world at Georgia, it doesn't mean that he can't do that at Syracuse. This is no shade to Syracuse. They're not Georgia, and that's okay. No program really is Georgia. So one player not really being able to carve out a role there, they can still come to Syracuse and be a highly productive player next season. I like Meeks to be a big body receiver, probably going to be the wide receiver 2 for next season. And then you have the third transfer that they brought in, which is Justus-Ross Simmons. He's a 3-star transfer from Colorado State with 2 years of eligibility remaining. And last year, he caught 45 passes for over 700 yards. I believe he also had 3 touchdowns. And he's someone who is also a big body receiver. So a couple big body receivers, a field stretcher in Zeed Haynes. So Justus-Ross Simmons is someone I like. I really like him. A lot of teams were pursuing this guy in the transfer portal. I know that the Florida Gators were after him. I know that a couple other SEC teams were at least poking around. He had a very nice list of teams that were after him. So perhaps it's one of those guys who was a 3-star transfer, but might be a little bit underrated in that regard. Justus-Ross Simmons, he projects to probably be a wide receiver number 3. But when I look at this receiver room and you compare it to last year, it's significantly upgraded. It's so much better. Zeed Haynes, Jackson Meeks, Justus-Ross Simmons, not Justin, Justice. Those guys are all better than any of the receivers that Syracuse had last season. They're all better than those guys. Last year, the Orange's number 1 receiver was who? Damian Alford? That was the number 1 option. And now this year, they got those 3 guys. Trevor Pena, who did well at the spring game, probably is the wide receiver 4 as we speak. Maybe he flashes a little bit more as we get into the summer months. But this wide receiver room and what Fran Brown has done with it, he's massively upgraded it. Kyle McCord doesn't have the same weapons that he did at Ohio State. Okay, when I look at the room, there's no Marvin Harrison. They don't have Emeka Egbuka, right? They don't have those type of players. But I believe they do have a pretty solid trio of wide receivers to throw to. You got a field stretcher. You got 2 big body receivers. There's also Trevor Pena, who's not a transfer portal addition. Then you also have LaQuint Allen out of the backfield who can catch passes, and Aronde Gadsden as your Swiss Army knife wide receiver / tight end. Dan Villari. The list goes on and on. I'm just going to give you literally every single skill player for Syracuse football this season. But I think the main overarching takeaway here is that the depth of this skill position room, the receiver room, the tight end room, the running back room is significantly better, in part because of these 3 wide receiver transfer portal additions when you compare it to last season. So once again, the 3 wide receivers that Syracuse football added in the transfer portal: Zeed Haynes from Georgia, redshirted last year, was a 3-star transfer, but could be the wide receiver 1. You got Jackson Meeks with 1 year of eligibility left. He is also a 3-star transfer from Georgia. Missed the spring game with a foot injury, but probably will be okay by the start of the season. And then Justus-Ross Simmons from Colorado State, a big body target again. had had over 700 yards last year. A very solid addition as well. Now, coming up, we've talked about the quarterbacks. We've talked about the skill players and the wide receivers. It's now time to talk about the trenches. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton, including their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot Panico machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we're going over every single player that Syracuse football has added in the transfer portal on the offensive side of the ball. We talked about the quarterbacks, Kyle McCord and Michael Johnson. We talked about the trio of receivers, Zeed Haynes, Jackson Meeks, Justus-Ross Simmons. And now it's time to talk about arguably the most important part of the offense besides a quarterback, the trenches, the offensive line. Because we talked about the receivers being better than in years past and them having two really solid tight ends and a quarterback who can get his skill players the ball in Kyle McCord. But if you can't block, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you can't block. So, Syracuse football added 4 players on the offensive line in the transfer portal. Let's start with Joshua Miller, the 3-star transfer from Georgia. He redshirted last year. He's got 4 years of eligibility remaining. He is an interior offensive lineman, and he projects to start. This was someone who I believe was also a 3-star recruit heading to Georgia. He is following Fran Brown. No surprise, Syracuse football took a number of Georgia players and brought them onto their roster. It's common whenever a coach goes from one team to another to pick up some of their players that they previously had. See it in all sports. So Joshua Miller, nothing new. He projects to be a starting guard next season. Next up, Demetrius Weatherspoon, a 3-star transfer from FCS Howard. He's got 2 years of eligibility remaining. He was an HBCU All-American, and he's someone who could be a starter next year because this is an offensive tackle group, because he's more of a tackle, that they have a lot of them. But there's going to be a healthy competition right now. And as we get towards week 1 of the season, because they're not solidified by any means just yet. This offensive line not solidified. So Demetrius Weatherspoon, he projects to compete for the starting tackle job, along with Enrique Cruz, David Wollaba, who's coming back from an injury, Mark Petrie, and Savion Washington, who I'm about to talk about. So that's that with Demetrius Weatherspoon. Now, as I said, Savion Washington, 6'8", 320 pounds, a 3-star transfer from Colorado. He made 9 starts last season, so a lot of experience with him. And he is a 5th year, so this is his last year of eligibility. Look, he projects he could be a starter next year. As I said, this tackle room has got a lot of players, and you only can start two. You can only start two tackles next year. But with someone who made 9 starts at a Power 5 program like Colorado, and I know they didn't have a great season last year, but still, he started in the Power 5 last year, and his pass blocking grade per PFF was a 70. Is that good? Or it was nearly a 70. And for those that might be asking, is that good? Is that bad? What does that mean? Well, PFF considers a 50 to be average. 80 is considered really, really, really good. And so Washington checked in at 70. So he is an above average pass blocker. So if I had to guess, I think he's going to be one of the starting tackles for next season. But because they have a lot of them, I can't guarantee that he is going to start. Everyone clear with that? That makes sense? Cool. Now let's go to Cody Hornsby, a 3-star transfer from Grambling with 2 years of eligibility left. And he said in an interview after he transferred that he came here looking to start. Another one of those guys who's looking to start. He's expected to compete for a guard spot because he projects to be more of a guard. And also something that I read is Syracuse apparently told him that when John Ray Reed graduates after the season, Hornsby could compete to be the starting center for next year, which I found pretty interesting. So Hornsby from Grambling, he said that he knows that it's going to be challenging, but that also he can prove it wrong and he can step in and be a starter for this team. Well, he's going to have to compete for it with a lot of other players there as well. So the offensive line transfers: Joshua Miller from Georgia, Demetrius Weatherspoon from Howard, who is an All-American in the HBCU, projects to be a potential starting tackle. Savion Washington from Colorado could also be a starting tackle next season because he made 9 starts with Colorado last year. And Cody Hornsby from Grambling might be a starting guard. Who knows? But Syracuse has added 4 offensive linemen in the transfer portal. When you look at the amount of players that Syracuse football has added on the offensive side, they've added 2 quarterbacks, 3 receivers, and 4 offensive linemen, making that a total of 9. So Syracuse football has added 9 players on the offensive side of the ball in the transfer portal, and probably half of them are going to start for next season. I would say that Kyle McCord is a lock, Zeed Haynes, and then one of Jackson Meeks or Justus-Ross Simmons, because they're not going to start 3 receivers. So you'll give one of them to those guys. So that's 3. And then I think Washington will start, which is 4, and Joshua Miller starts, which is 5 total starters, which is pretty good. 5 starters in the transfer portal. I can see the optimism that people have when they say, winning more than 10 games. I can see why people say that. I still have them at 8. Call me a Debbie Downer all you want, but I'm going to be 100% honest with you. So that's that with Syracuse football and adding players on the offensive side of the ball in the transfer portal. Now, some other news, just a quick little side note here since we have a little bit more time on the podcast today. I recently saw that Munir Hema transferred to Howard, so congratulations to him. Wish him all the best of luck. He was someone in his last 2 years. He had some moments. I know he had a 7-block game against St. John's off the top of my head, which I believe I mentioned in another podcast, but Munir Hema finds a new home. So out of all the players for Syracuse basketball, I believe the only one that transferred out of Syracuse that is still looking for another home is William Patterson. Everyone else has found a new school. So to recap that, it's Malik Brown at Duke, Benny Williams at UCF, Quadir Copeland at McNeese State. Talked about a little bit about that yesterday. Justin Taylor at James Madison, Munir Hema going to Howard. And then now we're just waiting to see where William Patterson ends up. And a reminder with Syracuse basketball, they still have 3 open scholarships remaining. So if William Patterson wants to head back or Syracuse basketball wants him back, he could still come back based on the amount of scholarships they do have left. But that's besides the point. So that's your update with Syracuse basketball in terms of their transfer portal standing right now. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications because you never know when I'm going to be dropping the next podcast, right? Usually now I've started to shift to the night of. I think it just has been working better. I like it. If you guys like it, leave a comment below. And also, should have said this off the top, but which transfer are you most excited to see for next season for Syracuse football on the offensive end? Leave a comment below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And everyone, take care.